Normally when you are surfing the web, you're downloading HTML files to your computer. So for instance, in a network situation, you'd have a computer that was connected to a local area network like through a switch, and so this switch might be connected to lots of computers. It could even be multiple switches that are connected to hundreds of computers throughout an organization. So that's your local area network. But then when your web request wants to go out to the internet, to get out of the network you need to use a router. And so your switch would be connected to a router, which in turn would connect to internet service provider through what they call a local loop, which is just your telecommunication lines to get you to your internet service provider. And then your ISP would then be connected to the internet. Okay. And then somewhere else on the internet you would be either be some other ISP connected to the internet, which connects to somebody else's local area network through a router using telecommunication lines. And that router at that organization would be connected to a local area network. And that local area network would have a star topology where it connects to multiple computers. And one of the things that it's going to be connected to, in addition to all the workstations, would be a server, one or more servers. In this case, the server that in question would be a web server. Right? So all of that is just fine. And then when you go to surf the web, you are going to use a web browser like Internet Explorer or Firefox or Chrome or Safari, and you're going to put in a URL, Uniform Resource Locator, a web address like http://www.cheese.com, right? And then once you do that, it actually resolves your domain name to an IP address, and it sends a web request through your switch, through your router, to the ISP, to the internet. By virtue of the IP address of the destination, it finds its way through the internet to the destination ISP, destination router, destination switch, and finally the destination server. On that server includes your HTML files, hypertext markup language, the language that web pages are written in. And so your HTML file, in response to the request, travels that path all the way back to your computer, and your web browser's job is to interpret HTML. Okay, and so everything's good. Now, by interpreting HTML, it's using the HTML code to draw your web page on the screen. It will show graphics where they're supposed to be. It'll show colors. It'll show fonts, all that sort of thing. Now, when your HTML includes a form, right, the data that's in your form when you hit the submit button has to go someplace to be worthwhile, right? And so there are certain kinds of scripts that can be used. In general, one very common scripting language in web design is JavaScript. Well, JavaScript is called client-side because it is interpreted or run by the browser at the client. But there's other kind of scripting languages that happen over here at the server. So for instance, PHP is an example of a server-side scripting language. And it's fairly common that when you are filling out a form, when you hit submit on the form, the target of where that data goes is actually a server-side script. And so there are certain kinds of scripts that we refer to as form handling scripts. And what these scripts do is they collect the data that was submitted in the form, and they do something with them. Maybe they write them to a file on the server, maybe they write them to a database on the server, in addition to writing them to a database or a file, or sometimes instead of, they can actually generate HTML based on the content of those data fields in the form, and send like a receipt back in the form of a web page to the client. So all this to say that in order to do much that's functional with the data submitted in a form, you really need a server-side script written in a language like PHP or Perl or ASP or some programming language on the server. There are a few exceptions. You could do a mail to, something like that, so that it stays client-side, but most of the time in an organization you care about that data, you want to collect that data, and so you're going to actually go server-side. We're going to take a look at form handling and what happens when, or how you can manipulate the information that's submitted from a form, how you can deal with the data that comes from form submissions. And so we'll start out with the form that we're working in a previous assignment. Let me shrink this down so we can see it, and I can close that. And sorry about that. Get it on the screen here for you. And so here's a form. This particular form has got first name, last name. There's an email field, a password field, some radio buttons, check boxes. Here's a drop-down list, text area. So if we're working with this form, we can look at the code. And here's some CSS, but basically what's going on in terms of its content, we've got inputs in a form, and these forms are going to post to a form handler script called welcome.php. This is a server-side script that gets processed on the web server, not at the client. And so the idea is that when the user fills in these fields and hits submit, then the data that fits each one of these field types gets sent to this script on the server, and whatever programming is in that script is run, and you can write the data to a file, you can write it to a database, you can send a receipt, all that sort of thing. Just to kind of simplify, all we're going to do today is kind of generate a receipt, but we're going to echo back, the content that was sent. But I think it will illustrate that the data is passed from the form to the script and then manipulated by the script. Okay? So the way that this data gets sent to the script, the data is tagged with the name. So here, when we have an input field, one of the attributes is name. So for instance, this one is fname. And so we're going to handle the data by name, by these names that are listed here. Okay? So let's create a new document. And this is going to be an HTML document. I'll zoom in here so you can see it on screen. This is going to be an HTML document with a head section and a title. And style section. It's generally a good idea to have your receipt, just like everything else, match the look and feel of your website. I'll just create a container for now, opening and closing tags, and then we're going to end the head section, and we'll start the body section, and then leave some space before we close out the body section and close out the HTML. Alright, so this is just our HTML structure, and what's interesting about this is that even though this is an HTML document, when we save this, save as, we're going to actually save this with a PHP extension. So welcome.php. That PHP extension isn't necessary for the server, assuming it's a Linux server, because Linux doesn't use extensions. But it does tell everyone involved, it kind of flags them that this is going to include PHP code. So we say save, and Then what we're going to do here is we're going to do a mix of PHP and HTML. So when we consider that the form is going to be sending us, let's start with first name, right? So let's do a paragraph, and in that paragraph maybe we have some text that says since this is called welcome, let's say welcome, comma, blank. Like we want to say, like if Jim submitted the form, we want to say welcome Jim, right? And there's no comma. So this is where we do a PHP include. So an include is a snippet of one kind of code in a different kind of code on a document. So the PHP tags are similar to HTML in that they open and close with the less than and greater than symbol, but to specify that it's PHP, it actually needs to have that question mark PHP in the opening tag, and then or the opening bracket, and then a closing with a question mark on the closing side. All right, so that's just the opening and closing to this one tag. That's all that is. Okay, so PHP is a scripting language, like a programming language, so you could impose programming logic. We're just going to use a simple output statement, which is echo, and all that does is generate some code that would replace this tag in this HTML document when it's interpreted by the browser. And so what happens is when the data is sent from the form to the script will collect it we'll collect it, and then you can access it by referencing the value. So I do $, the value of the post, so the post is all uppercase, and then you need to specify which property of the post that you're talking about. So the syntax is to use square brackets, and then you specify in quotes which field we're talking about by name. And so the first name field was called fname, right? And then this whole conglomeration also requires a semicolon, right? So I know this kind of looks foreign. This is kind of some stuff you haven't dealt with before. But the stuff in red is just the opening and closing brackets, and the question mark PHP specifies that it's PHP code as opposed to HTML code or JavaScript code. The echo command just says print this to the screen, and then the whole rest of this stuff is the method for picking out the first name submitted data from the entire posting that came from the form. Okay, so I'm hoping that makes sense. We'll say welcome, and then maybe we can do a BR at the end of this line, just to make it look, one piece of code on each line. So then we could say something like your last name is, and from here most of these PHP includes are going to look pretty much the same. We're going to do, instead of fname, we're going to do lname, right? And we can take the BR as well. Okay, so now we just need to run through each of the inputs. Your email address is, email. I'm going to shrink just a little bit to keep it on the lines, all right? And then your password is, and then what is next? I gotta look. So we had first name, last name, email, password. The next question was, do you like cheese? And the name of this radio set is cheese. And the question is, do you like cheese? So the answer here can be your response to cheese is, in this case, the field that we're going to look for is cheese. And so this is a yes or no checkbox. So this would read, your response to cheese is yes, or your response to cheese is no. Alright, silly, but you get the idea, hopefully. Alright, the next one is a checkbox container, and this one is interesting because each checkbox needs to be specified individually. So there's a checkbox called cheddar, a checkbox called Swiss, and a checkbox called stinky, right? And so we can say the kinds of cheese you like include okay, and then we'll get rid of this BR. Okay, and we can do one for cheddar. And then on the same row, I'm going to do one for Swiss, and I'm going to do one for stinky. Okay, so the way it works with the checkboxes, I only need one BR. With checkboxes is it'll check the value of each checkbox, and if the checkbox wasn't checked, the value comes back null. There's nothing in it, and so nothing shows with the echo statement. But if the checkbox is checked, then it's going to present the value that is specified in this code. Right? So if the checkbox is checked for cheddar, the word cheddar will appear. If the checkbox is checked for Swiss, Swiss will appear. If the checkbox is checked for stinky, stinky will appear. But if they're not checked, nothing appears. So it's simply not included. Right? Alright, and then what's next? Next we have a select menu, but the entire select menu uses the name dropdown. So you don't have to do it by option, only the option is passed using the variable dropdown. Oh, what was the question? The question was, what kind of cheese do you like? That's kind of redundant here with the cheese questions. The kind of cheese you selected is dropdown. Oops. I got that somehow out of the bracket. There we go. Drop down. Actually, I got too many brackets is what's the problem. Alright, there we go. Drop down. Okay. Alright, and then I think we have a text area still. Yes, this text area is called comments. So you can say, oops, your cheese comments are oops comments. Alright, and I'll put the BR on this line. Oops. What did I do? What did I do? I just wanted to copy the BR. There we go. Alright. Alright, if I had any other content I wanted to put on the page, I could do so. I don't, so I'm just going to try to remember that I started a paragraph here, so I'm going to end the paragraph here. And what we should end up with is basically a list of items that reflect everything that was submitted on the form. Okay. You can get as complex here as you like. I mentioned earlier that we have the style section. I'm going to go back and look at the form. And in the form, in my CSS here, the only thing that's relevant to a non-form page is the body tag. So I'm going to highlight and copy this body tag and put it in the style section here. And all that's going to do is it's going to set the background color. It's going to set the font that is used. So there you are. Alright, let's save this. And now here's a tricky part. PHP is a server-side script. It's only going to run on a server that's running PHP. So, in order to test this to make sure it's working properly, we're going to have to post these files to our account. So I'm going to open up FileZilla. It's thinking about opening. There we go. Alright, so I'm going to open up FileZilla. The web account is cisco.australiamountain.edu. Your username should be your MEID. My username, I'm just going to use a class, CIS133DA, and I have one called SP17, Spring 17. I'm going to use my password. Your password should be your MEID with a $sign at the end. And then port 22 is very important because SFTP is the only FTP protocol that this server supports, and that happens on port 22. So if all is well, I'm going to hit Quick Connect, and it didn't work. Host does not exist, it says, which means I probably had a typo in the host name. Yep. Alright, Quick Connect, and there we go. Okay, so in my account, in the CS133DA Spring 17 account, here's my public_HTML folder, which is my web root. So I'm going to open that up, and I see I've got folders in here. So then what I'm going to do is on this side, I'm going to navigate to my desktop, which is where I put my project folder. And so under Users, under Nichols, under Desktop, I have a folder called Form Handling. Right? So if I click on that, it shows me the content of the folder. Now in this case, I don't want to put everything that's in this folder onto the web server, so instead of copying the entire folder over, I'm actually going to right click on the server and create directory, and I'm just going to put in a new folder called Forms. Okay, so here's my new folder called Forms, and in that folder I'm going to copy index, which is my web page that has the form on it, and I'm going to copy welcome.php, which is the PHP form handling script that we just wrote. Alright? So, now that we've done that, then we open up a web browser. And in this web browser, we're going to go to Cisco. And look, it knows most of it for me. We're going to go to cisco.australiamountain.edu/CS133DA SP17. And I just created a folder called Forms. Because the form page is called index.htm, it shows up by default. So here's my form. Okay? Alright, so now the test is, I'm going to fill out the form, and when I hit submit, it should submit to the form handling script that we just wrote in PHP, and it should send me a receipt back. So Jim, email address. I like that my browser knows my email address. Password. Do you like cheese? Yes. What kinds of cheese do you like? I like cheddar and stinky cheese. I'm not a big fan of Swiss. What kind of cheese do you like? Stinky. Right? And then leave your cheese comments. And so I can leave a comment like, there should be more cheese choices in the drop-down menu. I like lots of different kinds. Doesn't matter what you type there. I'm just putting in some data, right? Okay, so I've got all the fields filled out. Now I'm going to cross my fingers. When I hit submit, all of this data should go to the PHP file. It should generate a receipt, and if it doesn't work, it's an opportunity for troubleshooting. Alright, here we go. Click to submit. Alright, welcome Jim. Your last name is Nichols. Your email address is, your password is password. Your response to cheese is yes. That was our radio button, yes or no. The kinds of cheese you like include cheddar, stinky. Those are the boxes I checked, cheddar and stinky. I could have scripted the word and or commas. The problem is you don't know for sure what the user is going to check, so you're not terribly sure how to deal with the grammar. We'll deal with that at a different time. I'm sure we could structure this in a way that it makes it work, but we won't worry about that right now. The kind of cheese you selected is stinky. That was from my selection box. and your cheese comments are, and there's the information I put into the text area. So all of that came into a new web page. And here's the part that I find particularly fascinating. If I right click on this and say view page source, look at this, the page source. It's everything we just wrote, except wherever there was a PHP include, we have actual data that has replaced the PHP include. So when the server-side script interpreted that PHP file, it looked up the variable for LNAME and FNAME and email and password, and it took the data from the form submission and replaced the PHP include code with the actual data, and then generated a new HTML that it sent to the browser, and the browser is showing it. The thing is, it never saved it as a file. So every time I wanted to see this data, I would have to resubmit a form to get a new file on the fly. And this speaks a lot about the dynamic nature of web pages, especially input-based web pages that that are generating HTML as you input. All right, so I hope that that's helpful. There's some different steps to it, right? You gotta write the form, you gotta write the PHP script, you have to upload them both to the web server, and then you have to test it. If it doesn't work, then you gotta go back and edit the code, save it, and resubmit it, re-upload it to the web server, test it again. So yeah, there's a lot to it. Want to reiterate that in this case all we did was echo, which was to generate HTML code, but you could use something like this with a PHP script to write to a database or to write to a file. Different things you could do with it. Alright, happy coding.